This is the Realty Classroom Podcast, episode number 139. You don't know what you don't know. Are you a real estate agent with an entrepreneurial spirit who wants to turn your job into a business without sacrificing your lifestyle, but you just can't seem to find the right plan or any plan to help you get there? Well, then, hey, you are definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Realty Classroom and the host of this podcast. Now, to help you take immediate action to get started in a more strategic business-like direction, we've created a free strategic plan for you that's waiting at freeagentgift.com. That's freeagentgift.com. Boy, do I wish somebody had given me something like that when I started, and that's exactly why I created it for you. It at least gives you an outline to work from. Whether you're new, a top producer, you can think strategically rather than idea hunting and pecking. All right, let's get started. You don't know what you don't know, said a wise man to me once upon a time, and that's the first point here. That's exactly what good old Michael Gerber, at the ripe age of 80, said to me when I met him at a conference one time. He happened to be speaking at the Infusionsoft conference, which is a software now known as Keep, that I adopted early on to manage all of my contacts, my contact relationship manager. That's the terminology I like when you hear the term CRM, contact relationship management, because that's exactly what it is. So as people move along there, I used Infusionsoft so that multiple people in my team would not lose track of where we were at in each relationship. That's how top producers do it. They segment a database and they pay attention. So needless to say, Michael had a huge effect on the founders at Infusionsoft who used Michael's work, like I do, as inspiration, like my mentor did, as inspiration to go from this moment where you want to have this thing called a business and then you just sort of stumble forward and do it. And you need to think about it much more, in much more detail than that. So the gents over at Infusionsoft had used Michael for many years as a consultant. And so here he was speaking, and I couldn't wait for the chance to go hear him speak. So sneaking into the room a little bit early, Michael was sitting there with his son-in-law, and they were just sitting by themselves. And I took that opportunity to take the very infographic that I give you at freeagentgift.com, to take that very thing, show it to him and say, look, you inspired this. Because when you see it, or you already have a copy of it, it will talk about the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician. And that's very core to Michael's work, where he's trying to teach you that you need to have a different perspective than just you have this, he calls it this entrepreneurial seizure, where you wake up one day and you realize you can't work for somebody, you're unemployable, and you want to start a business. And that happens a lot in this real estate business. Right now in my brokerage, the Griffin Realty Group, we are very aggressively expanding beyond the geographic boundaries that have held my mindset tight for many years. And we have over 150 people, 160, I think to be exact, have replied to an ad where they're interested in the business. So there are enormous amounts of people out there all across this country, other countries, that are intrigued by real estate. Real estate's a big deal. You know, you're talking about somebody's primary residence for the most part. And that matters to people. It's a big financial and emotional transaction. So people are drawn to it for a lot of reasons. But it's a business. And you are an independent contractor when you come into this business, for the most part. The majority of real estate agents take the formation of independent contractor, which means that they own their own business. And so they typically might have to incorporate, or however they set up structurally. I'll leave that alone. But Gerber collides in here and says, whoa, 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 whoa. That's called an entrepreneurial seizure, where you just feel like, I'm just going to do this. And I can't tell you how many of these people come to me off this ad, and they haven't even gotten their real estate license yet, but they're so intrigued, they're actually genuinely looking for help. And we're good with those people. We'd love to be part of their lives early on. I'd love to be a part of your life. If you stumble into this podcast and you're thinking about real estate, wonderful. You stumble in the right spot. Go to freeagentgift.com and start right there. Just the same exact course that I give away to somebody that I would recruit. And I introduce them very quickly in that course to the term business. And that's the first part of the free agent course. It talks about how this is a business, not a job. And that mindset's everything. Because a lot of people that want to quit their job and stop working for a company and come into real estate don't recognize there's a mega difference between working for somebody and picking up, your salaried paycheck and getting your benefits and calling it a day at 5 o'clock in the afternoon versus saying, I'm now responsible for the whole business. I just didn't escape the job 9 to 5. I started a business. So I think when Gerber said to me, When I first met him, wonderful, sure, and he signs the copy of it and he's all excited. I reintroduced myself as having been mentored by somebody who he had mentored. And he just collided into the conversation in the middle of it. And if anybody's ever met Michael Gerber, and if you haven't, he's a character. Let's just suffice to say. And so am I. And so it was an aggressive conversation in a lot of ways, positively aggressive, but it was aggressive. A couple of high D guys having a conversation about business. And he just retorted at one point, "You don't know what you don't know." And it was really a moment stopper is what I'll call it. Because in life, when you're getting advice and mentoring and coaching from people, there are specific moments in time where you stop in your tracks and it really hits you. It means something to you. Maybe you're ready for that type of message. But in that moment, I was ready to hear him say that about me, my mentor, top producers. He was talking about everybody. You don't know what you don't know. And that goes hand in hand with the idea that this is a business. And that's the first thing that we typically don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of us do know it. You know that you're going into it, but you don't really get it. You don't really understand the grandiosity of the moment of starting a business when you do it, because a lot of it starts out of passion to be free, to be creative, to have your own thing, right? Those are sort of the fundamentals of starting a business. And again, a lot of you get confused because you go work for a brokerage and you see that as a business. And you see you going to work for there, but you use the wrong terminology. My boss, all of this type of stuff. I'm not saying that there's not a boss, there's not a manager, but you are an independent contractor. And so the second point here is, if we don't know what we don't know, what question do we ask ourselves to begin to learn? And that's the next point. How does the real estate agent business really work? It's simple. How does it really work? And most managers, owners, and people in the industry are ill-equipped to answer it, because they themselves have never really thought about it. I think there are plenty of agency owners who thought about it very differently from the agent. They're both business starters, but one looked at it as a place where they would really understand the full business in its entirety and have a cache of agents working under their brand. That's the agency. And for some reason, agents don't see that they're starting a business, that they're trying to figure out, who should I partner my small one-man, one-woman business with? See, when agents come to the Griffin Realty Group, I tell them this is a partnership of two businesses coming together. As an agency, we are going to cover certain things, such as coordination of all of the legalese in the state within which we operate, so that we take that responsibility as a broker. We coordinate the errors and omissions insurance. In my case, we coordinate the closing coordinator. In my case, we coordinate the signage. You see where I'm going? So I'm making business decisions on what I will offer that other small business. And I tell them, you're a small business and you're starting. So I offer you the biggest thing amongst all of, or beyond all of those basics that a brokerage would offer you. I'm going to offer you a plan, because I want you to know how the business really works from an agent's perspective. If I was starting again, I literally started with, a couple of sticks, rubbing them together, trying to create a spark. Literally, that looked like 2,000 business cards and a positive attitude to go out and talk to people that sneezed the words real estate together, right? So that was not good enough. And I knew better. I was coming out of the venture capital business, sophisticated finance background, and I just really didn't know where to find a plan. Back then, the internet wasn't something that you just went to. It was for big businesses. It wasn't accessible to people in a one-on-one individual basis in the house. So I went to the bookstore and I scoured all the shelves, and sure, I found plenty of stuff about how to flip a house, but nothing about how to be a real estate agent successfully. So there wasn't a plan, really. I'm not saying it didn't exist, but you couldn't easily find it. That's for sure. So I recognized that I had my work cut out for me, and I really started to study. I would read every magazine trying to figure out, how does this business really work? With focus on, I needed an agent who had their stuff together in this way. And that's how I found my mentor, because at the time he had already been twice number one Remax, and he had been influenced by people like Gerber. A lot of the systematic approach. So I knew that to be successful in that business, you needed systems. So that's how the business really worked. Well, voila, going back to my experience in the venture capital business, I recognized that the biggest business, they also had really good systems that oftentimes, even though they were simple, became a very powerful word called proprietary. meaning as a venture capital company, we were looking for somebody that had something very unique and not easily attacked by the competition. Well, in the real estate agent business, that sounds like, well, wouldn't that be great? But everything's easily copied. Yeah, but I've come to realize that the way that this business really works is that most agents and agencies never really work on their business. They don't really work to improve it. I mean, think about agencies. They might just throw a gimmicky type of thing out there where, there's a, and I'm not knocking anybody. You'll know who I'm talking about when I say this, but profit shares and downlines. I like those things. I think those are good money incentives, but those are the things that sort of attract the herd. And it's, do they really work on that business model beyond that? Or do they just go with that one thing and just keep working it, right? It's sort of like a Zillow with their algorithmic approach to taking a guesstimate online. What are they doing to really improve the business model? I mean, I'm sure all these businesses do. I don't pay much attention to them because I'm focused on globally trying to figure out beyond those things I've learned about those companies. How does the business really work from a consumer facing standpoint? Are we improving the lives of the consumer, the buyer and seller? And in my case, the agent, because I'm an agency too. So you see where I'm going? I really give a lot of thought to this, and I really observe a lot of that from that lens. So what I would say is Gerber gave me the idea of a lens, and that leads to the next point here. How do you actually work on a business? So let's go back through this. Gerber tells me when I meet him, you don't know what you don't know. That wakes me up to say, okay, great. How do you start to learn? Well, the second point was by asking, how does the real estate agent business really work? So you become an observer of what's obviously there, but then you begin to work on it by thinking. See, the greats in business spend an enormous amount of time reading and thinking. Buffett's known for it, Gates is known for it, and many others. So the nerds, quote unquote, the book nerds, the bookworms, they tend to do a lot better in business because they do spend an enormous amount of time actually working on it by reading, thinking. So see, what that does is there is some part of it when you're working on it by just observing something that's successful. But what I found very quickly is you have to be careful there and begin to trust yourself too. Here's why. As I started to observe a lot of top producers, I also started to really study them and understand from a nerd's perspective, wow, they're making some serious mistakes here. And what I mean by that is I started to work on, and I copied a lot of that methodology and buying leads and learning how to convert them and following up and marketing. I did everything that I was told to do by mentors, teachers, and coaches. But when you're in the thick of it, you stop just taking everything for granted and you say, well, okay, we got this far and we have production, but is profit where it should be? Because this is a business. So what don't we all as top producers not know? And I began to see it. I began to see that a lot of top producers were simply going out and buying the next shiny object, the next website, more leads by the pound, by the ton, where leads are far surpassing the number of transactions that happen in at least the United States. So hello, that's working on it. You come to that realization that you're buying a lot of whimsical internet inquiries. You're not really even buying a lead where there's context. So by working on it, I became aware. And I think that's what really made a difference for me. And the next part that made a difference for me was, okay, let's just stop kibitzing around with each other and telling each other as top producers, agencies. We have all of these seminars and webinars that we have in our industry. How many of them include the consumer? Right? I'm pausing there for a second. How many of them include the consumer and what the consumer's opinion is of our business? Because a business is typically something that has been set up to take advantage of an opportunity to solve a consumer's problem or maybe improve their quality of life, and they didn't even know that they could do it, like the computer, right? The personal computer, computing chips. And I'm listening to the biography of Steve Jobs right now, or about Steve Jobs. And it's very fascinating. It was just a very simple concept that back in the mid 70s, Wozniak, his partner, they were dinging around with these chips. And these were typically reserved for some big computer sitting in some back room doing all this computing. And then the goal was to, well, how few chips can we put right here on the machine in front of me to get it to do some of the work right here? So it's fascinating, right? Simple concepts. And that all of a sudden, you realize, well, voila, we can put this kind of power in the hands of the individual. So you see, the reason why Apple became so wildly successful Sure, they probably stumbled into a lot of it in the beginning, but the point is they were able to improve the life and solve a problem for the consumer having to wait you heard me say it. I mean, I'm old enough to have been limited to the library and the bookstore. Spent an enormous amount of them. They had to kick me out of Barnes & Noble many a night, right? So when you look at it that way, well, the computer gave me an improvement of life. It solved a problem for me. And that's why that company was so wildly successful. So see, when you're working on these other ideas and concepts, now I can come back to you today and say, look, you're a consumer of mine at the Griffin Realty Group if you're an agent. You're a consumer of mine if you are a seller or buyer. So I need to be there doing things that are creative yet simple, right? Back then, the chip existed and technology was improving. So it's just a simple concept that they were doing. So I looked at it and said, well, what's my best stuff for free? What if I would just take my best stuff and I would work on my business by taking my best stuff and simplifying? How simple could I make it, thanks to Einstein's concept, without it being too simple and people saying, well, that's dumb, right? And that doesn't add any value to what I have to do. So I chunked it up into 3 simple infographics and voila, I had worked on my business so much that it got much simpler for the consumer. And in turn, the consumer tended to be more drawn towards me because they felt more empowered by what I was doing. See, this all came from working on my business obsessively and constantly and never ending. In fact, when I do these podcasts, I'm reaffirming to myself a thought that I had this week. You hear me reference exactly what I'm listening to. I've listened to 3 audiobooks in the last 2 weeks, or I'm in the 3rd. One was about Tony Hsieh, God rest him, now that he's passed, the young head of Zappos shoe company, and Nike, Phil Knight, and now Steve Jobs, right? So I'm listening to those things so that I can come back to my business and I can say, well, what am I not doing at Griffin Realty Group? The model, the physical model. Well, I'm not helping enough people. I'm seeing these geographic boundaries. And we're already in an internet age. Why? So bang, just like that, thinking about Phil Knight way back in the 70s. Also, both businesses started in the 70s, long time ago. So there was a longevity of these people really working hard on these businesses, but they didn't see geographic boundaries and they were getting on planes. They were doing it the hard way, going into Japan, looking at factories, right? So it's just fascinating when you start to work on it and you see the similarities of people that are already in some past that did incredible bodies of work. But that brings me to the last point. As I'm working on it, so again, don't know what I don't know. Got to keep asking myself how this business works. And by the way, I just opened up another can. Like, how does our business work relative to these other success stories? Are there ideas and concepts that are common to all businesses that we can bring back when we're working in them? And the last point here, though, is something that strikes me about all those stories. When you listen to them, and as a fellow entrepreneur, if you've taken the risk of starting your own business, you understand what that's like. Especially if you're married or have a partner and you have to explain to your partner, like, well, no, it's going to work. It's going to work. It's going to work. You know, that's the plight of the independent contractor who's always trying to sell themselves. And then everybody who loves them and says, why don't you get a real job? In other words, why don't you break into jail? And they have no idea what that would do to your spirit. So the best advice I can give fellow entrepreneurs is how to avoid taking wild risks and instead build this predictable and sustainable business. Well, that sounds pretty sexy and interesting, and who wouldn't? But again, we go back to, well, is there a simple way? And that's the challenge. I always go back to that concept of the simplest solution is the best. Occam's razor, if you look up that philosophy, various spellings, but I think OCCAMM maybe. Go to Wikipedia and read that. And then just Google Einstein and simplicity, and you'll get enough educational background on how a simplistic approach towards something is probably the best. Because what it does is it edits out all the noise. And the problem is, in a world where we push education, formal education, we get almost so overly educated, we just don't want to believe it's simple. So to build something that is simple doesn't require the wild risk of the hippie-esque type of persona like Jobs was. You don't have to be wild, and you don't have to be, like Tony Hsieh. I mean, when you think about the guy made $40 million when he was just a young guy with this company called Link Exchange, and then he risked it all for Zappos. The question is why? How much did Tony really work on that business, and why was it so big and risky? And why is venture capital always about taking a massive risk? I remember when I worked in venture capital for a short period of time, the company I worked for refused to invest in companies where the owners were out of control and spending wildly. Their premise was, if you learn how to lose money early on, you tend to exacerbate that over time. So what I would say is, when you're working on your business, and I tell this to, several of my own agents at Griffin Realty Group or at the Realty Classroom Mastermind, slow down, but be aggressive. I know it sounds weird, but it's like, if you'll take a beat to be strategic. So for example, if you say, I don't know what I don't know, how's the business work? Well, it's all based on listings. How do you know that? Look in MLS, they're all listings. They're not an inventory of buyers. It's an inventory of listings. Okay, great. How do I get listings? Well, you have to go into a geography and find out who has context to sell. Great. How do I do that? Well, there's people that expire. Our own business gives us opportunities to talk to those people. There are also people that pass away every day. And so local attorneys and administrators are publicly available. So you see, you just quickly can boom, 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 boom. You move through it swiftly. And that's a simple dialogue about how the business begins to work. Of course, there's a lot more, and you have a lifetime while you're in the business to work on it, but that's a great start. So if you would just work only on the things that help you do or help you acquire listings for the least amount of money, and you can make that profitable per deal, well, you're already in the mindset early on. And if you need to reset right now because you're top producer, get a hold of your expenses that you're wasting on things that don't help you acquire more listings, don't help you acquire an agent who can use those same systems to acquire more listings. Edit things out. And if you're new, really understand that you want to win profitability early on. Don't spend enormous amounts of money. You can still be aggressive. And a lot of people will say to me, well, you're keeping something from me. All these top producers have. No, they don't. No, they don't. Some of the best producers I've ever met who are wildly profitable, they spend an enormous amount of time with just two words, work ethic. They work their tails off. And then that's rewarded. Effort's always rewarded. Sports, business, people will always refer you when they see effort. The problem with those folks is they never get any leverage and they end up drowning themselves in just work. So somewhere in there's a business. Okay. So let's leave it at that. Let me go back and summarize. In this episode, we're covering you don't know what you don't know, because the first point was that's exactly what Michael Gerber actually taught me personally when I met him personally at the ripe age of 80, but still feisty. 2, the way that you begin to know what you don't know is by asking good questions. And the best one for small business people in real estate is, how does the real estate agent business really work? If you keep asking yourself that question, you're off to a good start, right? And then the question begs, well, how do I continue to work on a business? Well, you get up above it on a regular basis and keep asking, well, if I know it's listings, how do listings work? If I know I can get some expireds, how do I get an expired the best way? You see what I'm saying? You're always asking how once you're in the thick of it. And lastly, you can avoid taking wild risks and guessing and all that. Just be strategic from the start. And you can do that again by just going to get a copy of my free agentgift.com. It's the one page that Michael signed for me. He recognized his work, he appreciated it, and I appreciate him. Let me summarize it this way. When I finally had a chance to meet Michael Gerber, author of The E-Myth, at the age of 80, I walked away with a lesson of, you don't know what you don't know. Although it left me spiraling I wrote this, so I'm trying to read it, sorry. Although it left me spiraling, okay, which means I was like, whoa, that's a pretty big statement. What does that mean for all of us? It was that simple statement that helped me fully understand that we must discipline ourselves to study how the real estate agent business really works, and then put the systems in place that make it our own very reliable and predictable asset. All right, I'm going to say it again. Said it a lot this time. Remember, you can take immediate action and get started in the right direction. Just get a free copy of our plan over at freeagentgift.com. Also, don't forget you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And we also broadcast our live sales training calls on Facebook and YouTube every Friday. You can go look at the recordings right now. If you're listening to this, just go over to either one of those channels, look for the Realty Classroom, and you will find recordings of live sales training calls so you can see some of the technique and tactic that we've worked on it and then we work in it, right? You can see it. We'd also appreciate it, of course, if you would comment, send us an email, let us know that you're out there and breathing. I can't believe how many people just don't ask for help, and it's simple to do, and we'd be happy to do so if you reach out. Hey, thanks for listening, but remember one important thing. I always sign off the same way. Nobody's coming for you. So go get to work on your own business, and I will see you in the next episode.